Thank you so very much, Jim, for coming and for this Centennial celebration and agreeing to be part of the oral history project of our deans. Yes. So if let me begin. When did you serve as dean, and how long did you serve?
Well, I hope you don't mind if I don't answer it exactly, because I think just kind of to give a framework for it, I came to the college in 1970. And so I had been on the faculty for 10 years when Arnold Webb, who was the then dean, asked me to become associate dean. And I want to kind of start with that because in effect, that was kind of a more interesting time than the time as acting dean that followed immediately. And it was interesting because it was the time that we were moving into the NAC building. The NAC had been designed in the late 1960s. And that design plan didn't change at all. And when New York City had its financial crisis, and that was the time when the CUNY senior colleges went on a state payroll rather than a city payroll. When that happened, the work which had begun on the NAC came to a grinding halt because of the financial situation. Now, Clapper Hall had been an Episcopalian orphanage. And sometime in the 40s, it had been bought by or taken over, whatever, by the college. And that had become the new School of Education. And it sat directly across from High School of Music and Art. And when I came to the college, we had Lewison Stadium, which was immediately to the north of Clapper Hall. So what happened is they tore down Lewison Stadium and they began construction on the NAC building. And by about 75, they had the framework of steel girders and so forth, all erected, cement slabs for floors, but it stopped. So in 1980, when I became associate dean, the construction was just about at the point where it was beginning again. Now, all the faculty were in Clapper Hall, but all of the administrators were in the administration building. And we had a large part of the second floor of the administration building. So we were well separated from faculty at that time. Arnold Webb pretty much, I was very fortunate. He gave me pretty much a free rein in what to do for moving into the NAC building. And so I did things such as, determine the F&E budget. What we had, I think, $500,000 to spend on furniture, equipment, and so forth. And so I got to make decisions about that, decisions about telephones and faculty offices and all of those kinds of things. But when we moved in, our faculty was maybe a half of what had been when the plans were being made. And so accordingly, we didn't get all of the space that had been planned for us. In departmental offices, which had been spread out in the NAC, for example, the whole area that the English department had occupied on the 6th floor was supposed to be one of our School of Education offices. So everything got shifted around, but they still had their plans for where all the furniture was to go. And it was to go in the spaces that had originally been planned for every one of the department offices. And so one of the things that we had to do, and the we here was myself and Henny Wong. and Henny was Henny was a fantastic help in all of this. Um, what we had to do is take department office furniture from places where there were not going to be department offices, at least not ours, and move them to places that were going to be department offices. So Henny always somehow gets things and gets things done. And so we would go over there in our spare time and load up dollies with office furniture, this big secretarial desk with the wings off to the side and all of that kind of stuff, and to relocate them, sometimes from the third floor to the sixth floor and so forth. So that was probably the most challenging thing during the period from 1980 to 85. Now, in 83, Arnold Webb, who had been dean, decided that he was going to make a move over to New Jersey and the State Department of Education there, and he resigned in June of 83. He had had a big position in the New York City Board of Education before he came to city. And so with his resignation, I became acting dean in June of 83. And it was not nearly as exciting as moving into the NAC. It was, as associate dean, I kind of take care of the internal running of the School of Ed. And as dean, is the external running of the School of Ed. I was very fortunate. I had appointed Don Cody as the associate dean when I was acting dean. And Don was a secondary education person and excellent. The main thing that was being done at that time was that the A. Philip Randolph Campus High School was opening up. It was moving into the old facilities of music and art. And Don, as a secondary ed person, was ideal for taking care of all of the problems and issues that had to do with that school and our relationship with the school. And so I only had to just take care of, going to university committee on coordination meetings and that kind of thing, down to the, trustees meeting when there are curriculum items that would come up before it and so forth. So that, it wasn't all that interesting, really. We did some good things at the time. We were at the beginning of the emphasis on bilingual education. And so, we had hired some very good people, and we're developing bilingual education programs. So there was work with the state ed department, getting those programs registered. There was a bilingual extension certificate, which we got started at that time. Center for Worker Education was on its way, and I did a lot of work with Steve Lieberstein out of the provost office to get the program for daycare workers down at CWE. So that was one of the kinds of things that was done at that time. Other kinds of things that we did. Tom Carey, who's in charge of the administration supervision program, wanted to have the SDA program operating out of the Board of Education down 110 Livingston Street. And so I was kind of the person who made sure that happened. So, there were things like that. And during this time, I had been working on some science ed projects with Harold Stoloff in the physics department. We had a comfortable physics project. Beginning to work some with Gary Benenson in engineering. And so there were these other things that were going on, and it was all fun. So in about the spring of '85, they completed the search for our dean. Leonard Beckham was hired at that time, and so I moved out of the deanship in June of that year. And for myself, I always considered myself very fortunate because I got to move between administration, faculty to administration, back to faculty again. On the faculty, we had grant-related work that I enjoyed doing. So I was on the faculty until it was January of '93 that Marty Marin, for whatever reason, decided that he wanted to resign as dean and move down to Florida. And so in June of '93, I became acting dean again. I think El Pasmentier was associate dean at that time. And, you know, the funding of things that Gary and I were doing had developed. And so I was kind of doing both of those while I was acting dean. And we also, you know, one of the good things about being in that kind of position is that you meet with a lot of other people from around CUNY on various committees. And so there was a group, Jim Bruni from up at Lehman and Roz Waltman from Brooklyn and some others who got together and then we had a pretty big grant from, I think it was National Science Foundation, I'm not sure, Collaborative for Excellence in Teacher Education, which spanned at least 5 of the colleges. So that was, you know, provided interesting things to happen. And everything was going along pretty well. We knew that there were financial issues because our adjunct budgets were regularly cut. The budgets for equipment and supplies and all of that were kind of tight, you know, all of that stuff. But it wasn't until about March that we began having retrenchment meetings. And retrenchment is kind of an ugly word, but what had happened is that there was, you know, meetings of the deans and the provost and so forth, and said, look, how are we going to deal with this budget shortfall? There's no way at this point that we can save money any way except by firing faculty. And the question then becomes, can you really afford to fire those who were last hired? Because those searches had brought in some really excellent young people. And so the decision was made that we would have a programmatic retrenchment. And that's the only way that you really can break tenure. Is if the program no longer exists, then you no longer have a job. So we met all spring on that. It was obviously not a happy time. Across the college, you know, that was the time when the college essentially retrenched the entire School of Nursing. It retrenched the physical education department. Within the School of Education, it retrenched the school psychology program. It didn't retrench any department, which was fortunate. Back 10 years earlier, in '75, with that financial crisis, they had talked about retrenching the foundations department. And it was kind of a scary thing. And the reasoning by the people in the administration was that we have a history department, an economics department, a psychology department, and why can't those folks teach the ed psych, the economics of education, the politics of education, and so forth. I had very good friends in that department at the time, and people were scared. Several of the faculty at that time who were non-tenured were simply not rehired for the fall. That included people who had been voted to have tenure, but their tenure wouldn't begin until that September. And they were fired before their tenure began. So it was a nasty thing. But the only real retrenchment was in the school psychology program. It was at the time that the college was able to make a deal with New York City Tech to take over the industrial arts technology program department. And so faculty had the opportunity to either transfer over to New York City Tech or to retire. And a couple of our faculty were fairly young at the time, and a couple were older. And it was a small faculty. I think there was only around 4 people. I may be off by a couple, but 2 of the faculty said, no, I really don't want to be having to travel all the way down to Brooklyn. And they retired at that point. And 2 of the faculty went on down to New York City Tech. So yeah, it wouldn't have happened if it had not been retrenchment, but it wasn't quite as serious a situation as it was for nursing and PE, and there may have been others. Anyway, that was probably the most strenuous time of my time as acting dean in the 93 to 95 period. The earlier part was much more fun.
So I'm wondering, I'm now at the thinking about the hopes, your hopes for the School of Education. Did your hopes for the School of Education change in the different time periods that you were acting dean? When from 83 to 85, or from 93 or 95, or did you keep the same hopes as you were proceeding in your position as acting dean?
I think city always played a major role in preparing teachers for public schools. We had a large number of students going into teaching. I think we're better than almost any of the other CUNY schools in minority students going into teaching. Those were things I valued. Because we had done the work on developing bilingual ed and had good bilingual ed programs, those were, in the 83-85 period, when we were at the beginning of that, obviously it was a hope that it would really be strong. And I think 93 to 95, we had very good faculty there. So other hopes, though, one of the best things that happened to me was that within 2 years of me coming to the college, for some reason, Lillian Weber took me under her wing, so to speak, and involved me more and more with the workshop center. And I came more and more convinced that the kinds of things that she was doing was really what had to be done, and that her philosophy was one which, although I had a very poorly developed philosophy at the time, it clearly fit in with very much with what I thought needed to be done. And so my hopes were always for strengthening the work of the workshop center and for strengthening child-centered education. So those, and they really didn't change that much from one decade to the next.
In thinking about your service as a dean, would you like to speak about what you feel most proud of?
Well, I think I was involved with developing programs that I'm very happy about, the CWE program, the bilingual programs. So happy with that. I think we ended up doing a good job of moving into the NAC building. So that was kind of not dean, but it was associate. And, you know, I think we came out of the retrenchment thing in relatively good shape. So, I mean, those things I would say I'm satisfied with.
Okay. And the final question is, from your perspective, how has the School of Education made an impact on public education in New York City and beyond?
Well, you know, I think, you know, again, I would state our bilingual programs have developed good teachers. All of our programs have developed good teachers. The most noticeable impacts, I think, and those for which we're best known are those that happened through Lillian Weber, through the work of the workshop center under Lillian. She really did change teachers' practices, or helped teachers change their practices, I should say. And it was, you know, City College was known, the School of Education was known because of Lillian Weber. We had foreign visitors coming here from Asia, from Europe, because of Lillian. And so even if you go around schools now, and you know, I've been working with Bruce Cans on some things relating to the Centennial, and there's still teachers in those schools who who say yes. You know, it was Lillian and the workshop center which shaped me. So that is, I think that's the single thing that has probably the most important.
Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome, Catherine. Have a good day.